usually put me in the box by now.
Oh, I guess I do, don't I? Okay.
What is your problem? Oh, you had to get the brownies out. What did you do?
What do you mean, what did I do?
That looks like a big pile of... Never mind, we're in church. I'm getting out of here.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
Oh, Dake, you're right. I don't know what happened. Those of you know that I love to cook, but I'm not very good at baking. And I read somewhere that if you do brownies in a cast iron pan, they turn out great. Well, they look like... What's the church-appropriate term? They look not great. I mean, I followed all the directions in the box. I made sure that the cast iron pan was greased and it would release these wonderful, delicious, appetizing looking brownies. And they look like something that shouldn't be parading around in a sanctuary, I'll tell you that right now. So it's kind of, it's a failure. And kind of keeping in line with what we were talking about with the kids, it's like if you make mistakes and you have a failure, do you just ignore all the other good things that you're good at? All the successes that you've had, and I've always focused on the things that I've messed up. And I could do 99 things almost perfectly and make all kinds of people happy with things that I've cooked. But you give me one failure and I will obsess about it for a very, very long time. Well, maybe I shouldn't have used the cornbread pan. Because cornbread shaped like corn looks cute. Brownies shaped like ears of corn looks not so cute. So we'll leave that. We'll leave that. Because we always have something that can go wrong. We are imperfect people. We are living in an imperfect world. We are surrounded in relationships by imperfect people. And yet somehow we have it in the back of our minds that perfection is attainable. Isn't it true, if we're being honest with ourselves, that our greatest goal in going through something and trying to create something and working on something is we just don't want anything to go wrong? Very rarely do we expect perfection. We just don't want anything to go wrong. And yet our mistakes can pile up and begin to feel oppressive as something that defines us. And we're supposed to be people who believe in grace. We're supposed to be people who believe in forgiveness. We're supposed to be people who believe in Christ making us new creations as many times as Christ has to do it. When we live in community and we don't surround each other with love and grace, people who make mistakes a lot begin to feel as though they are a mistake. But in good community, in loving community, we hold each other accountable for our actions, but we do so in love, so that even when a mistake happens, we can all learn and do better. Because this whole bad string of circumstances can get in there into our minds. We can begin to think that we're always at fault. Such that when we then get around somebody who does make mistakes, sometimes intentionally, we won't even catch it because we'll just assume it was our fault. It reminds me of that old episode of the Andy Griffith Show. And I could have just shown the episode and it'd be better than the sermon, but we don't have that kind of licensing or time this morning. So it's the episode titled The Jinx. Remember that one? I'll give you a really short synopsis. Barney, in a fit of frustration after losing a checkers game to Floyd, claims Henry Bennett, who was just standing behind him, hexed him, and Henry's a jinx. Barney's accusation takes hold, and soon other townspeople begin to believe that Henry's a jinx, with everyone making sure that their mishaps are blamed on him. Andy, seeing Henry's distress, attempts to prove that he's not a jinx by inviting Henry to join him and Barney on their fishing boat for the opening day sweepstakes. The fishing trip, intended to boost Henry's confidence, backfires when they encounter a series of misfortunes, further solidifying the belief that Henry is a jinx. Andy must come up with a plan to convince Henry that he is not a jinx before he decides to just completely leave Mayberry. And ultimately, Andy succeeds in restoring Henry's self-esteem and proving that he is not a jinx, allowing Henry to stay in Mayberry. We believe what people say about us. And we can take it deep within our hearts. We're always looking for something within ourselves to dislike. Not to work on, not to change, not to address. And when we do make a series of poor choices or just fall short a few times, we begin to really believe the worst about ourselves. You ever think about that? Do you ever feel that way about yourself? Have you caught yourself kind of in that kind of downward spiral? Have you ever just decided to believe it? You realize how insulting that must be to God, who loves you more than anything, beloved? I'm just worthless. That reminder says otherwise. So how do we deal with that then? The prodigal son begins with someone who thinks more highly of himself. He doesn't want to follow the traditional route to stay home and continue to grow the family business. He's within his right to demand his inheritance before his father is gone, and sets out with a pocket full of money and a head full of dreams on how he's going to live his perfect life, how great life is going to be. And, he was one of those people who always thought, if I can just get one, if I could just get maybe 2 rungs higher than I am now, then I'll be happy. If I can just get a little more, then I'll be happy. If I can just, then I'll be happy. So he heads out and he does all the things he thinks are going to make him happy, and he surrounds himself with people who constantly tell him how great he is as long as the money's going. As long as the drinks are flowing, he's great. And they all tell him that. But one day the money runs out. Famine strikes the land he's living in, and he has to find work. And eventually he's throwing slop to the hogs, a job he didn't even have to do at home. And he's lower than he's ever been, and he comes to the realization that he would be better off just believing how horrible he is and crawl back home and be a servant in his father's house. At least then he wouldn't be hungry. Father runs out to meet him. And I've shared this with you before, but it bears repeating, that in ancient Mediterranean society, because the son had the audacity to take his inheritance while his father was still alive, it dishonored not just the father, but their whole village, their whole culture. That young man was no longer a person of honor. In fact, he was dishonor itself. So if they would have seen him coming before the father gave the all clear, no, he is under my protection again, the young man might not have lived to get to the home he was trying to get back to. So when the father runs out and embraces him while he was still far away, it is because the father is aggressively trying to love his son and keep him alive. He just found out his son is still alive, fearing the worst in the land where the famine was taking place. And so he goes out and he wraps his arms around him, and that tells everybody around, his honor is restored because I have given it to him. He wronged me. I forgive him. It's over. And that's powerful. Because that's just a little blurb in the story. But it's probably the most powerful part. Because that father not only says, I forgive you, not only throws him the party, but he runs out to make sure nobody harms his son. And we know that rest by heart. The older brothers, he's not really scolded for being grumpy and jealous, but he's affirmed that he's always been by his father's side, and the father sees no difference between his oldest son and himself. Everything that I have, everything that I am is yours. You are beloved. In terms of authority or value, he is equal to his father. And the older son's jealous, and the father snaps him out of it to remind him that they believe that the prodigal had died, knowing the kind of life he was going to choose, but now that he's been restored, now they want to celebrate. And the father tells the prodigal that the prodigal was dead but is now alive, and that's why they celebrate. But the prodigal son is now going to spend the rest of his life wrestling with his choices and the wasted resources. He's going to question himself each time he makes a mistake. But there in that household where there is grace and there is love, where he was welcomed back with open arms, he will have other options to believe about himself. He will not be left with the only option of he is a wretched, wretched, mistake-laden person. Now because of the love, because of the forgiveness, now because of grace, he can believe something better about himself. When I decided to do this series, I was always afraid of telling you, believe you're good enough. That would just kind of let you off the hook of trying. That you'd stop trying to grow and you'd stop trying to have goals of excellence in your life for how you love God and yourself and others. But really, as we're getting down into it, I think the larger problem, the issue bigger than not being inspired or challenged enough, is our fear that the mistakes we make will add up to be fatal in some way. Maybe not ending our life, but killing different parts of us off. So what happens? We stop being creative. We stop pushing boundaries and trying something new because that fear of failure, of stacking up more mistakes, of everything bad being our fault, it just grows. Our fear of the risk becoming too great, and then we really do stop growing. Really do stop trying. Because why try, right? If you live like this long enough, you won't try much anymore to grow, because when we grow, we make mistakes. Sometimes juice gets spilled. Sometimes brownies don't look appetizing. Usually, but we make mistakes. Hurt others without realizing it, and we have to make amends. Remember, we will make mistakes, but we will learn and we'll grow. None of us will be close to perfect at anything right away, but here's the good news about this great thing called community, that if we live in the community environment where we know we will be loved anyway, we are more free to live fully and more hospitably towards ourselves. If we make our circle of friends, our family, our church places where we're always loved, we can all become better people. People more like Jesus tomorrow than we were today. I want to close with this. You've heard of the Serenity Prayer. Here's another version that's tailored to what we've just talked about this morning. I'm going to invite you to repeat after me. I'm going to do a line, and then I'll give you the cue just to say exactly what I said, and we're going to pray this out loud together. God, grant me the serenity to stop beating myself up for not doing things perfectly. The courage to forgive myself because I'm working on doing better. And the wisdom to know that you already love me just the way I am. And together all God's people said, Amen. In the name of the Creator, the Redeemer, and the Sustainer. Amen. Before we begin the prayers of the people,